It's a good time to talk about deflation because it's everywhere you look. I've never seen so many sales in my life. One of the most noticeable recent events is that Ford just marked down its flagship pickup truck, the F-150, by $10,000. That got my attention. And Microsoft is making Windows 10 upgrades free. It's all because retail sales are sliding again, badly. But they're not going to tell you that. You can only blame the weather for so long, though. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and it doesn't affect only prices. Deflation also hits wages and employment and assets big time. So what's the root cause? Well, confidence, plain and simple. Confidence in the economy, and as a result, your own financial well-being. If people lose confidence, they stop spending. Now that creates less demand for products, companies lay off workers, people start to default on mortgages, banks stop lending money, credit dries up, and the bankruptcies begin. And on in a vicious cycle. That's what happened in the 1930s with the stock market crash. It's what happened in 1835, the largest depression in U.S. history until 1929. And interestingly enough, it also happened in 2007. History repeats. So, we're sliding into a depression, but the government will be the last ones to admit it. In fact, in Canada, we're now in a technical recession, but the Minister of Finance won't even say the word. Well, there's an election on the way, and governments know that a bad economy gets them kicked out of office, even though they have nothing to do with it. Perception, unfortunately, is reality. So, governments love inflation, because inflation raises the gross domestic product on paper. Well, that's like your annual salary, and it allows the government to borrow money against it, putting you and me further in debt. And look where they are now. Most advanced nations are bankrupt. They're well beyond the debt sustainability level, meaning it's impossible for them to pay back their loans. Now, there are two options. You can default on the debt or inflate. In other words, print money. But inflation lowers the value of our currency. Since 1913, North American currencies have dropped in value by about 96%. That's right. $100 back then is worth $4 now. Seem like it's harder to stay afloat? Well, that's because it is. Inflation is not good unless you're a business owner or have a salary pegged to the rate of inflation. Inflation is simply financial robbery. In fact, central banks like the Federal Reserve in the U.S. have been trying to inflate. It's called stimulus, but so far it hasn't worked. Inflation is under 1%. We keep sliding downhill economically into deflation. Deflation is actually good for the average person. It actually raises the value of currency. Assets like houses and cars and other things drop drastically in value. So if you're smart, deflation presents a huge opportunity. So what to do? Cash is king. Now remember that because that's important. Cash is king. Get out of debt because interest rates are going up. And if it makes sense, sell your home and buy it back in a few years at a fraction of the current selling price. Hold off on major purchases because things are going to get a lot cheaper. And investments in the market? Not a good idea. Markets have already topped. And as far as I'm concerned, traditional investing is dead. So don't get fooled by the idea that inflation is a good thing. It's ruined the world economy. We're awash in debt. Thank you, politicians and bankers. Deflation is good, if you're prepared. Now, the train is just leaving the station, so it's time to do some research and get ready to buck the trend.